Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We partner with businesses, organisations, unions and social democratic parties across the globe to develop community organising strategies and train leaders to build power from within their community. And in 2022, Dunn Street will continue to work with folks that want to share their stories, inspire others and organise communities for change. To find out how you can partner with Dunn Street, hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today is Dunn Street's birthday as well. Happy birthday. Today's episode is also sponsored by Maurice Blackburn. Maurice Blackburn's Dust Diseases team have accumulated more than 20 years of experience in asbestos litigation and pride themselves on ensuring that their clients not only receive the best compensation result, but that they are supported during their stressful and traumatic time. Maurice Blackburn are looking for a passionate full-time associate to join their Dust Diseases team in their Brisbane office. To apply, go to mauriceblackburn.com.au/careers. Hello and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and organising podcast out every Friday that dives into the progressive campaigns and the issues of the day, people leading them from home and abroad. And we are going to South Australia today because the South Australian election has been announced, which is set down for Saturday the 19th of March from memory. And we're talking to Adelaide Advertiser, journalist and author Michael McGuire about the campaign that has just begun in earnest on the weekend. Peter Malinauskas, the Labor opposition leader, launched Labor's campaign at a rally, which was fantastic. Excellent speech from Peter. We'll have a chat to Michael McGuire about the ins and outs of this campaign and where the race will be won and lost. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Stitcher. And if you like the show, be sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast and on Spotify when you're done listening to today's episode, or leave us a review on Apple Podcast or Podchaser. And for all the updates, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn. Okay, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Friday afternoon in sunny Melbourne on happy birthday, Dunn Street, 3rd birthday today. Mazel tov to me. And joining on the line from the great state of South Australia, my home state for 5 years, is a long-time journalist with the Adelaide Advertiser and an author, but also a advisor to various South Australian state and federal Labor governments. Michael McGuire, welcome to Socially Democratic.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
I think you are the very first person from the News Corp to ever come on my podcast. So,
are you breaking some sort of rule, or I'm breaking through a glass ceiling here, am I?
Yeah, maybe you've just shattered it. But it also
we're not all bad.
Exactly. It just proves that I'm a bigger person, I'm a better human being.
You've got to speak to all parts of society, Stephen, I think. There's no point in, shouting into the echo chamber.
Exactly. Now, some would argue that this podcast is a setup for you and I to talk about Celtic. That's why I came on. Yeah, exactly. We will do that. And I think we have at least 10 Celtic supporters that listen to this show. Hello, Sean Donnelly in the Middle East at the moment. But I think we'll leave that to the end.
Fair enough.
Okay. What I do want to talk to you about is the South Australian state election, which is on the second Saturday in
March 19.
March 19. It's always just too close to St. Patrick's Day as well, and that was a fear I had when I lived in Adelaide. I was like, one day it's going to clash and I'm going to be torn. What will I do?
I think a couple of 2014 maybe was, there's definitely been one on the 17th.
Yeah. Which is very inappropriate when you think about it.
Well, you end up drinking on election night either way, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about the election. I want to sort of cover off, the issues that will play out during the campaign. I want to talk about some of the target seats that are critical for Labor to win government back. I want to talk about the leaders themselves. But before we do that, I'm wondering if you can just sort of set the context of what the state of the South Australian Parliament is at this moment as we go into this election campaign, because over the last 4 years has been an interesting journey for the state Liberal government, which they, I think when they won in 2018, they came into government after a long, great period for Labor, beginning with Mike Rann and then Joe Weatherall. But eventually, like all, living in progressive liberal democracies, eventually you kind of, the public like to hand it over to some other group for a while. So Labor had a good run. But this has been 4 years of a Liberal government for the first time in a long time in South Australia. How has this gone?
Well, it's been an interesting time, as you can imagine. So yeah, Libs won at the last election after 16 years of Labor government. I would say the last term of Labor government looked like the last term of a 16-year government. It was a bit tired, a bit all over the place, and end up talking about all the wrong things and making some silly decisions. So in the lower house of the South Australian State Parliament, there are 47 seats. So at the last election, the Liberals won 25 and Labor won 19, and there's a couple of independents in there. So 25 out of 47 is clearly quite a comfortable majority in that sort of sense. And they came into it, as they do, full of life and, full of vim and vigor. But one thing that the Liberals aren't very good at necessarily is internal politics. And we saw, for a variety of reasons, a lot of Liberals, mainly in safe Liberal seats, kind of resign from the party, essentially. One member, a fellow called Sam DeLuck, behaved badly at a Christmas party and went to court to face assault charges. The allegation was he'd slapped a fellow MP on the bottom. He wasn't convicted on that charge, but the magistrate did call him a drunken pest. So he was forced to resign from the Libs and went and sat as an independent. There was a thing he called the country members, allowance scandal, which essentially was, if you're a country member, you get, a travel allowance essentially to come to the city for Parliament. The allegation again was that 3 of them had been rorting that allowance in some fashion, and they stepped aside from the Liberal Party while those charges were investigated. Some of them have been subsequently dropped and they've moved on. Some are still facing charges. One of them still facing charges is a chap called Fraser Ellis, who is a country member from the York Peninsula. So he's now an independent and he might well win. There's another fellow who's not connected with that scandal called Dan Kriegen, who came in at the last election in the blue sort of ribbon Adelaide Hills seat of Cavell. It's not clear exactly what his problems were, but he did quit the Libs as well and sat as an independent. He seemed to be one of those who thought he should have been in cabinet and he wasn't. So he actually said he was quitting and not running again, changed his mind and said he was running as an independent. And he is now actually also the Speaker of the House of Assembly, as these things work. So over the course of this, almost 4 years, the Libs have, almost entirely lost control of the chamber. So they've got they've gone from comfortable majority to minority governments. Some of those independents, including Ellis and Kriegen and the fellow called Tribellum and Gambier, who used to be a Lib as well, are favourites to win. So it may well come down to some sort of minority government either way. I think the Libs are still favourite to hold on to power or to cling on to power, but it's not as clear cut as it possibly could be or should be from a Liberal point of view.
How much damage has this caused the Marshall government, do you think, the Liberal Marshall government, all of this sort of backbench shenanigans?
I think it's certainly caused damage because it looks like they just can't quite control themselves, or, they're more interested in themselves than the broader population. But again, it's always hard to know just how much this seeps out into the broader community or how much of it is regarded as an indication that they can't handle themselves or the state, or that it's just normal political bickering and interference. And, what else would you expect from politicians? They're all out to look after themselves. But I think it's certainly taken a little bit of shine off it. I mean, along the way, I didn't mention she's still in Parliament, but the former Deputy Premier and she's technically still Attorney General, but has stood aside, Vicki Chapman, who's an ally of the Premier, had to step aside over a conflict of interest situation as well. It's a complicated story involving Kangaroo Island logging, and Miss Chapman at the time was also an AG plus planning minister, and she got herself involved in a planning decision on Kangaroo Island where she had property, and it's a whole long sort of story. So there was a vote in the House of Assembly, which came on confidence, and she lost the vote of confidence on the floor of the Parliament. So she had to eventually step aside as a minister. So there's been all these kind of shenanigans over the last 9 to 12 months, which makes them look a bit amateurish. But again, how much people pay attention to that, I'm not sure whether they just see it as political bickering or whether they see it as going to the question of competence. I don't think it's quite clear.
When I want to talk about the leaders now, starting with Stephen Marshall. When I lived in Adelaide, I went to a dinner. I think it was the Clipsal 500 dinner that's at the convention centre or something on the Friday night before Clipsal begins, and it's put on by the state government. And I remember Kevin Fowler got up Mike Raine got up and gave a big speech, and anyone and everyone was there that was involved in government and the race and corporate Adelaide and all that kind of stuff. The table I was on had Stephen Marshall on that table, and he was a plus one of someone who I think worked in government or something. I can't remember. It's irrelevant. And he was a fun guy on the table. Like, he wasn't taking himself too seriously, enjoyed a good drink, liked being a bit of centre of attention, liked to drop some gags, but seemed, pretty light. I don't want to say lightweight, but, I wasn't taking this bloke too seriously compared to some of the other people that were on the table. In fact, I think Kevin Foley might have been on our table, former state treasurer. Then I moved back to Melbourne and go about my business. And then one day I sort of check in on what's going on in South Australian state politics. And now Stephen Marshall's not only in Parliament, but is now the leader and then becomes the Premier. And I was like, this guy's now the Premier of South Australia? How the hell did he even get into Parliament? That's my view of Stephen Marshall. What is the perception of Stephen Marshall by the voting public, do you think?
I think they see him as, they've seen a lot of him in the last 2 years because of COVID, and he would front up and do the press conferences every day along with the chief health officer and the police commissioner. And I think people thought he was a pretty reasonably safe pair of hands. He wasn't trying to, overstate his role. He was quite happy to follow the medical advice. He was very happy to follow the police advice, and he was there, but he wasn't front and center claiming all the glory in a sense for himself. It wasn't all on his shoulders, which has backfired on him subsequently to some extent. We might talk about that, but I think people saw him as just a safe pair of hands, quite reasonable. I think they found him an interesting change of pace after Ryan and Wetherill. Ryan and Wetherill certainly tended to be in your face a lot more, and were a lot more not exactly aggressive, but they were very. They were very obviously politicians and, sold a message as politicians. Marshall's always traded on not quite being a politician, a bit of an accidental politician. I mean, you have to remember that he was made opposition leader in his first term in Parliament, which, is pretty unusual. And he became sort of the leader after there was all, usual internal contretemps where Isabel Redmond was there, and she got rolled, and Martin Hamill-Smith was there, and he got rolled, and everyone decided it was all too hard and needed a new face. And after a brief period as deputy, Stephen came through the middle, and as the acceptable face to both factions, essentially, that we could get behind, and so that was in 2013 maybe. So he was very green, very naive. His background is in business. He was a businessman. Various sort of his parents had a furniture company which was quite large and sold off, and he worked in various fields. But he was a businessman, so he brought that sort of a typical sort of liberal business, business is king sort of view to the party. But he was an affable kind of character. The first time I met him, really, I did a story on him just before he became opposition leader. And he must regret this, but he took me sailing on his yacht, which is, not a great optic possibly for a Liberal Party leader. The yacht was called Public Enemy, which is another factor. So you think, oh, well, it is a bit, hoity-toity blue ribbon, what's going on? But afterwards, we went back to, this was at the cruising yacht squadron, whatever it was, but we didn't go to the bar afterwards. We went to his car, we're here in Eskimo with a couple of beers in the car park, and then just had a chat. So he was, he's not He wouldn't say he's up himself. He's not one of those out of touch kind of libs who doesn't understand what's going on in the world. You could easily have a chat to him. He's pretty good company and the rest of it. But so he styled himself mainly as this. I'm not a politician. I'm not Jay Weatherall. I wasn't Mike Rand. I'm not even Peter Malinauskas with my long history in unions and being involved in, Peter was the bloke who went to Rand to tell him his time was up and it was Jay's turn kind of stuff. So he's been enmeshed in politics from a long time. So Marshall makes great play of the fact that that's not him. And I think it was a bit of a change of pace, and I think people quite liked him and were prepared to give him a chance. But some of the glosses maybe come off as it does over the last 3 months, in particular, since the borders were reopened to New South Wales and Victoria again.
Let's talk about COVID then as an issue for the campaign. I'm interested in it. When I remember, the last 2 years is basically a blur, and I can't remember when. Yeah, I can't remember when this happened, but it was certainly at the time when the Premier of Victoria, Dan Andrews, was doing the daily presses. He did like 160,000 in a row or something. Yeah. And then something was going on in South Australia, and Marshall had to get up and do a stand-up with the Chief Health Officer. And the contrast, and a couple of my friends who former Labor Party media advisors were joking, saying, God, tough life being the press sec for the Liberal leader in South Australia. What a doddle that is. Just because of the way that the media pack just lobbed some of the easiest matzo balls over home plate for Marshall to hit. And even then, he was like he looked like a mixo rabbit in headlights. Like the guy was shitting himself, And I was like going, oh, mate, these questions are absolute doddles. And contrasting it with literally the ABC had just flipped from the hyena pack, Thunderdome, Daily Thunderdome with Dan Andrews and, the right-wing established media in Victoria. I was just like, oh, God, this is just pathetic. So I kind of thought this guy is just going to sleepwalk through this whole COVID thing. So things look good in South Australia, I thought, at that point in time, just by looking at that press conference anyway. What's happened in the last 3 months that you think things have started to come a little bit unstuck?
You're right. So Marshall, got away with, in a sense, he never got the grilling that Andrews got, possibly because we were doing well. After that first wave of COVID, we did relatively well. There was, very few infections, very few deaths. We kind of, after that first lockdown, got on with life to an extent, obviously not entirely, but so South Australians looked at the rest of the country. They looked at Victoria and said, well, we're not them. Isn't that good? We're not locked in our houses for months on end, and there's not, heaps of people getting sick and dying and the rest of it. So I think in Marshall, as I said, talked about, he took the health advice and he took the cops advice, and this is the best way to go. And while that worked, and while the numbers were good, and while people could, get out and about, that worked for him. So until we opened the borders here to New South Wales and Victoria on November 23 last year, so just ahead of the Omicron sort of thing. So at that stage, we'd had, I think we had 4 deaths over the whole course of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So I think at the last count, since November 23, we're for another 160 deaths. So South Australia kind of evaded that first 18 months of the pandemic in pretty good shape. But now, so we went from 0 cases in last November. Now there was a peak of around, 5,500 a day in the middle of January, right? So that's what scared people. We thought we were being, dragged into the whole, what we'd seen in New South Wales and what we'd seen in Victoria, and that had now come to us. And a lot of people were, people get scared, I guess, and people were unhappy that we'd opened the borders, I think. There's a lot of people, it was a divided argument. A lot of people thought we should have opened the borders earlier, but many more people thought we should have kept the borders closed and not invited Omicron in. Well, which is probably clearly unrealistic in the long term, but because we hadn't been used to it, we hadn't been through the hard days of Victoria and New South Wales, this was a bit of a shock to South Australia. We had, 10-hour testing queues at PCR sites and all that sort of stuff. And the health system seemed to be entirely unprepared for all this, coming to South Australia. So at that point, Marshall's decision to, if you like, hide behind the chief public health officer and the police commissioner was seen to be actually the wrong thing to do, because the people wanted them out there showing leadership and deciding, or running the state and keeping them safe and all that sort of stuff. And he was still seen to be, deferring to public servants essentially. And as it went on, because when we brought back restrictions as well, those pubs and all that sort of stuff were restricted in numbers. Then Marshall started to get offside with his sort of base community, especially when it comes to sort of fundraising. I guess the AHA, the Hotels Association here, are big sort of liberal donors and backers, and they went off the tree when restrictions were brought back in because, as we know, pubs were struggling mightily. Business SA, another sort of a, traditional liberal outfit, started criticising the government and asking for more help because the CBD was a ghost town and businesses were dying on the knees, and I think all that was heightened because just before in November, and we're opening the borders, this was Freedom Day, everything was going to be great, and there's this sense of optimism. And once the numbers started going up, the restrictions kept going. Restrictions got brought back in. People, felt let down. They thought it was over essentially. Then it was worse than ever. So they felt, let down, and Marshall took a lot of the blame for that, I think.
I wondered at the time if Marshall wouldn't go down the similar path that the Western Australian state government have done as well, and created this sort of fortress SA and said, I am all for South Australia, and appeal to that parochialism of people within the state to say, I'm going to protect my community, and we're not opening up the borders until a certain point in time. I'm assuming that wasn't happening because I reckon he would have been getting heavied from Scott Morrison saying, don't you dare, I'm trying to open up this country here and return back to normal. I need you to open those borders. Yeah.
I think that was part of it, but I also think with an election in March, I don't know if that would have been very popular. And, from your time here, you remember how popular the Ashes test is, for example, the cricket, is here. So we had our test match in, about 2 weeks after the borders opened. And if we had not opened the borders at that stage, they would have cancelled the cricket. And that would have been a disaster electorally for Marshall, I think, It's a bit bread and circuses, but there you have it, Because he opened up. He said before he opened up, we talked about opening up when we got to 80%. I think it was double dose vaccination, and we weren't there. We weren't short of it. It was 77, 78, but it was going to be 80%. We're opening up. Then it was November 23. We're opening up, no matter what kind of thing. So it kind of fed into the narrative that things were being rushed a little. And you've got to be saying, this was ahead of Omicron. They didn't see Omicron coming at all, clearly, like, many people didn't. So it may have been different if Omicron had hit properly a few weeks earlier.
Let's flip and then talk about his opponent, which is the leader of the opposition, Labor's Peter Malinauskas, former colleague of mine at the SDA.
Yes.
I found that I've said this a couple of times on the podcast over the last 2 years, of all of the opposition leaders in the country that have handled the role of an opposition during a once-in-a-century global pandemic, they've been incredible. There have been really bad examples of it here in Victoria, probably top of the power rankings on that one.
Yep.
But the one that stands out for me that has done a great job, I think, has been Peter Malinauskas and the Labor team. I want to get your reflections on how Peter and the opposition have played a role during the pandemic, and what your thoughts are on the strengths and weaknesses of it.
Well, I think, I think you're right. I think he did handle it very well. He took the approach that he was also going to rely on the health advice and the police commissioner's advice, and there was not going to be a cigarette paper between him and the Premier for much of it, and he didn't. It was a very much a straight bipartisan approach. If that's what the health advice is, we back that. And if that's what the Premier says the health advice is, well, we back the Premier. There was very little politicking, if you like, or criticism of how that approach was handled by Labour. They did a pretty good job of it. So that maybe they saw what's happening in Victoria and understood that the community felt scared at the time, and they wanted their leaders to show that they were in it for the community and not in it for themselves, and not looking to exploit marginal differences or marginal cracks in approach to these kind of things. So Malinauskas stood, pretty squarely behind the Premier and didn't make himself look like as the carping, negative opposition leader for much of that 2 years. So it's probably a pretty smart thing at the time. The downside possibly for him was that I think his sort of recognition levels with the community are pretty low, because he wasn't on the news every night shouting at Marshall what a disaster this was and he should be doing this, that, or the other. So he had very little visibility for a long time, Peter. So and he's still trying to make that up. He's running adverts here at the moment, who I am kind of stuff, running around with his kids and his wife, and shots on the footy oval playing footy and all that sort of stuff. So he's still trying to introduce himself to the community. So I think overall it was the right approach. I think if he would have annoyed a lot of people, a lot of voters, if he'd been a carping, whinging opposition leader, especially when SA was regarded as having handled that part of the pandemic very well. So there's probably no upside in him criticising Marshall, or there's no chance he was going to criticise Nicola Spurrier, because she was seen as the kind of the saint of the process, and everyone trusted Nicola's advice. So he wasn't going to criticise her, or certainly no one criticises police commissioners, do they? So he wasn't going to criticise him. So he tried to almost elbow himself in as part of the COVID team in a sense. He was right, but he was a good South Australian doing the best for South Australia.
Yeah.
But as I said, so that's So I think it was a net positive, but the downside was that he got very little visibility for quite a long time.
I don't want to jump ahead here, but I certainly think that what has helped his visibility, certainly in the last 2 or 3 weeks, is getting that rig out at the swimming pool for that announcement. Bloody hell, the Sunday Mail loved that one.
Commander in Beef, I think, was the headline.
There was a couple of crackers.
Yeah, well, it was. He's pretending that wasn't a well planned out thing, but I'm not so sure. But because this week, just to back up the whole fitness thing, he's inviting people to go for a run with him along the Torrens at 6 a.m. So right. He's out there looking energetic and fit and young and ready to go, and doing interviews with your journalists who are trying to keep up with him. He's certainly trading on that younger, energetic sort of new face for South Australia a bit. But I don't know. I don't know if the getting the top off is a negative or a positive. I don't know. A lot of middle-aged, flabby blokes like me might not have been too impressed.
Well, who is Peter Malinauskas for those listening that haven't been tuned into South Australian Labor politics, and how would you describe the style of leadership that he wants to present to the electorate?
Well, I think Peter has been, I don't know, you'd remember from working with him at the SDA, kind of, in footy terms, I guess, the number one draft pick for Labour for about the last, 15 years. He's been earmarked for greatness since he was, in his mid-20s, probably. I think he was spotted originally by, Senator Don Farrell, who took a great shine to him. And when, I think from memory, when Peter finished university, he'd already working, I think, for the SDA before he finished uni, went to the SDA after uni, then when Senator Farrell went to the big house in Canberra, Peter took over as SDA leader, which, in South Australia gives you great power in the Labour Party, among the Labour right in particular. So he ran the union for 7 or 8 years, I think. He did come to, as I touched on earlier, he did come to notice of the general public when Jay Weatherill replaced Mike Rann, because Peter, along with the then treasurer, I think, Jack Snelling, went to Mike Rann and said, "Sorry, Mike, your time is up after 9 years," which caused, as you can imagine, as you probably know, all sorts of anger and unhappiness. But they got past that. So Mike is now right behind Peter. You'll be pleased to know they seem to have rebuilt those bridges. So I think then Peter joined the Upper House originally here in 2015 or something, and went straight into cabinet. Was police minister briefly, then he became health minister even more briefly before the 2018 election, and then the Liberals are still trying to bang him, fair enough, too, with the health minister state, because Labour ran a pretty unpopular health sort of program last time around and shut hospitals, this, that, and the other. So they're trying to lay all that the feet of Peter at the moment, even though he kind of oversaw the end of those decisions rather than being the instigator, but he'll hold that responsibility. So he's trying to put himself forward, I guess, apart from the young and energetic bloke who gets his top off, as a friend of business in many ways. It's that he's a very much of that labour rights friendly with business, talking about jobs, talking about growth of the state, talking about the future. He's spent absolutely no time talking about the past, as I think he's trying to leverage himself away from the 16 years of Labour term last time around, which is understandable, to look at the future. And so about kids and families and growth and getting the health system in place, and he's been pretty positive for an opposition leader overall, I think. So he's doing he wants to present to the future.
It's interesting just to note the way that the Liberals have responded. Clearly, Labor and Malinauskas are in their head, because sort of talking to some people on the inside, that the Libs had brought forward a lot of their negative ad campaign early. Yeah. Because obviously I'm assuming that they're worried about Malinauskas, which is funny, because I just always come from the school of thought, if you're the incumbent, don't talk about your opponent, particularly when their recognition numbers are so low, because the minute you start talking about them, people start going, oh, who's this bloke? Or who's this person? Yeah. So to do that, they're obviously, there's a fear and a worry there, I'm assuming, within the Liberal camp.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think so, because the election, is going to be a lot closer than they would have thought it was going to be. As we talked about, the fact that they've lost all those safe blue ribbon Liberal seats into the hands of independents and might not get them back, there's a reasonable chance Labour can pick up a few seats. It's going to be a very tight run race, I think. I could be wrong, but I think it'll be a minority government either way, probably. But yeah, so it's a battle of everyone's trying to define Malinauskas at the moment. Malinauskas is trying to define himself with these adverts, and then the Libs are out there with their adverts trying to define him as old Labour, the health minister who wrecked the health system, union boss, that sort of stuff, the traditional attack job you do on a Labour leader for union links. So yeah, it's a battle for definition, I guess. But they're certainly worried. He's pretty good with. I've been out with him on the road a few times, and he's always very good with people as well. So is Marshall one-to-one, but yeah, Malinauskas is, he's very approachable. He's photogenic, telegenic, and just he's a straightforward, easy bloke to speak to, and I think people see that when they meet him.
He certainly, and I don't say this to suggest that Peter isn't strong on policy as well, but I don't think I've ever shared this theory with you before. Maybe we have over a beer, but my theory about how we should run campaigns should be like in excess. The front person has to be Michael Hutchins, that can sing and dance and look amazing. Meanwhile, you got the fat Farris brothers at the back writing incredibly amazing music, but just don't switch the roles. Don't get Michael to try and write songs, and don't get the Farris brothers up the front to sing. Everyone has their place within the government, right? And I think that you always need an attractive front person to communicate the policy strengths that the party has crafted. And I think that Peter Malinauskas fulfills that role. I just think that he, people will listen to him. I remember when he spoke at was it a Labor Party event, or was it an SDA national conference or something? First time I'd sort of ever heard Peter get up on stage and speak. And he wasn't party secretary. He wasn't a union secretary then. But wow, like people in the room were going, "Fucking hell, that." That was an amazing speech from a reasonably young person. Peter probably still would have been in his mid-20s then.
Right.
It was a great speech, and I think that's one of those moments where people go, that's like you said before. People earmarked him for it was the number one draft pick, right? They were some of those moments. But also, working on the shop, working in the shop floor and retail, reasonably diverse kind of union workplace membership. Engaging with people. Peter's always been really good union organizer, great to relate with people, hardworking, focused. I think those skills that he has brought to then the sort of, I guess, the political side of the movement.
I remember I spoke to Don Farrell about him once, and he said that He was one of the things he noticed about Peter was when he was a union organizer, he was very good at convincing people to join up. He was very good at recruiting. So that goes, I guess, would go back to personal skills and
absolutely
bit of charisma and the rest of it.
Yeah, and recruitment in any union organizer listen to this podcast will know it's fucking tough. Like it's hard work, and so you need to be able to connect with people on a personal level to get them to say, yeah, okay, I'll give your organisation $10 a week out of my wages.
Yeah,
that's a big commitment, right?
That's right, from people not earning a great deal of money.
Indeed.
Yeah.
What are the issues then? You've touched on health. I'm interested to get a sense about, is health going to be one of the key issues of this campaign? Not just because of obviously we've had this global pandemic, which is a health issue, but I've noticed certainly there's an issue with ambulance ramping, which is very similar to what was happening in 2014 with the Andrews campaign when we came into government. Talk us through some of the issues that are going to be front and centre of this campaign.
Yeah, so Labour are certainly trying to centre a lot of it around health. So as I said, they didn't criticise necessarily a lot of the COVID handling, but they want to sort of pivot from how we dealt with COVID into the state of the system, generally the health system generally. And ramping has become quite a large issue locally. I mean, it's easy to define, it's easy to demonstrate on telly and in the paper, and people get very emotional, and rightly so, about being trapped in ambulances. There's been a few deaths in ambulances and this sort of stuff. The ramping's not new, it happened under Labour as well, but it's become a bigger issue as we're seeing more and more ramping happening. So the Labour are talking about investing a lot more money into health as the kind of the centrepiece of their whole campaign. They're talking about $500 million. They're talking about 100 extra doctors, 300 extra nurses, 100 and whatever extra beds and all that sort of stuff. And they're playing that at the same time as they're playing that against the Liberal policy of the Libs want to build a sport arena essentially on the rail yards and in the CBD just off North Terrace, just a couple hundred metres down the road from Parliament House. So it's a kind of that arena is going to cost $660 million. It's 15,000 seats. It's incredibly expensive for what it is, I think, and it doesn't have a football pitch to my annoyance. And they want to, they're putting it as also for events and concerts and all that sort of stuff. So, but it's going to be $660 million, this multi-purpose arena. So what Labour are doing is they've branded that a basketball stadium, and that's all it is. They're spending, so they're trying to frame it as what are your priorities here? You can have Liberal build you a $666 million basketball stadium, or we will take all that $600 million and we'll put it into your health system. And that's kind of the high point of their campaign, or the centrality of their campaign. So around time now, the corflutes, so every second corflute it's about the basketball stadium. And I assume that they've done their internal polling and they've decided that this is entirely toxic. And it's not just in Adelaide, they're on stubby polls in the regions and in all sorts of places, playing on that thing in the regions about you're being forgotten while the Liberal Party spends $600 million on the city on a basketball stadium that no one wants, kind of thing. So every day they're out there talking up health, essentially, and how they're going to fix it, which they won't be able to. But that's another question. That's for once you get elected, I suppose.
Public transport as well seems to be coming through as an issue that that Labor's going to be campaigning on. Talk us about what the concerns are around public transport.
The Liberals privatised the train service. They didn't sell off the assets necessarily. They privatised the management of the trains, and Labour are going to bring it back into public hands, essentially. And that's the big fight when it comes to public transport at the moment. Again, how doable that is, I'm not 100% sure, but yeah. So that will be an issue. And there's Labour started the process of electrifying one of our northern rail lines, which is now, and again, it's one of those, everyone blames each other for the delays, but it's, hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, and it's, many moons late. It's about a year or two late already. And it's a train line that goes from the middle of Adelaide to Gawler, so right through the north of Adelaide, essentially. There've been lots of criticisms by Labour of Liberal that you don't care about public transport, you're abandoning northern suburbs and all this kind of stuff, and you're incompetent, essentially. So, yes, but the Libs just say, well, you set up a very poor process to start with, and we've had to fix your problems. So it's one of those situations.
What's the positive and negative frame that the Liberals are going to run against Labour?
Well, I think that they're, again, Marshall being very much a creature of business is talking up the economic future of South Australia. It's about the cut payroll tax, they're bringing, they're lowering costs for business, whether it's, land taxes and all these kind of, incidental taxes, making it a better place for, people to invest. They're talking about, spending a lot of time talking about what's happening on the old Royal Adelaide site, which is now known as Lot 14, which is kind of an entrepreneurial centre, which houses the Australian Space Agency and is bringing in sort of a lot of startups. So it's all that kind of entrepreneurial stuff. Companies such as, Google and Amazon have set up things here, and the Commonwealth Bank have set up things here. So they're talking about this as, trying to take the state away from its old heavy base of manufacturing, in a sense, which has died in the arse to some extent. And this is our new exciting future, bringing multinational companies to South Australia. This is a place where your kids can have jobs. You don't have to leave the state anymore to find a good job if you're a young person. And trying to talk up the excitement of a booming South Australia. So he's essentially saying, I've set the state on this path, and you should let me continue with it, because if you go back to Labor, it'll go back to the old ways, and the economy will die, and taxes will go up, and your kids will be running for the hills, kind of thing.
Let's talk about the seats that are in play in this campaign. I've earmarked 4, but I want to get your thoughts on if I'm missing any. But King, Newlands, Elder, Adelaide. Yeah.
Well, I think so. I think the way that Labor sees it is that they need to win Adelaide, King, and Newlands as a starting point. So if they win those 3, they get from 19 to 22. And remember, the 47-seat parliament, they're going to need to get to 24. But if they get to 22, they think they're in with the chance of either picking up a fluky one somewhere or doing a deal with an independent to form government. So Newland and King are in the sort of outer northeastern suburbs. They kind of abut each other, really. And Newland is going to be fascinating. It's kind of, outer northeastern suburbs, middle class, young families, tradies, kind of, areas. So you've got the incumbent is a Lib who holds, Richard Harvey holds it by 0.1%, I think. So there's a Labour candidate, Olivia Savas, and there's also an independent, Frances Bedford, who's moving into that seat. Now, she used to be next door in Flory, but after the redistribution last time around, she kind of lost a lot of her base in the Modbury area. That moved into Newland, so she's moving into Newland. So it could be a genuine 3-way contest there, and I think it's going to be very hard to see exactly where it falls. So if Labour, Frances was a long-time member of the Labour Party before she went independent, so I guess they'll be hoping if Olivia Savas doesn't win, then obviously Frances Bedford wins, because then they might be able to do some sort of a deal with her. But it's an interesting one. It's got, I think that the 3 of them will have really fancy their chances of winning that one, and it could come down to very fine margins of who comes first, second, and third.
That's an interesting. It's a real toss-up, that one. And Olivia Savas looks a fantastic candidate that the Labor Party have selected for the seat of Newlands. What about King? What's the story with King? That's also super marginal as well.
It is very marginal as well. So King is just immediately to the north, and it's a slightly different sort of a setup, that seat, though. It encompasses some of the Salisbury area. So it's King used to be called Napier until the last election when it became King. Napier used to be a very solid Labour seat, but the way it's been redistributed since then has made it much more marginal, because it took a lot of the areas of north of Elizabeth, which were solid sort of Labour territory, and they went to other sort of safe Labour seats. So King is now still got bits of Salisbury, but it's also got bits of One Tree Hill and very regional sort of areas. I mean, the top end of King butts into a seat called Schubert, which is a regional seat which covers the Barossa Valley. So it kind of goes from the outer bits of Adelaide into the country. So it's a mixed up kind of seat in that sense. So again, it's another one that can go either way. I know the Libs have got I think that says Richard Harvey's in King. I think he's quite well regarded by the Libs, at least, so that they fancy him to hang on. But again, it's going to be a close run thing, which makes it difficult. difficult election to predict. I think there's quite a few seats that could go either way. So, the Libs could still win comfortably. And if they hold on to all these seats and, get a couple of independents back, they could certainly win comfortably. But I think Labour, they're certainly right in with a shout. So then I think they're very keen on Adelaide. I think they think Adelaide, if it's not in the bag, is pretty close. They pre-selected a candidate called Lucy Hood, who used to work in Peter's office. I've worked for Tom Christentonis previously, and I think I even worked with her at the Advertiser back in the day, a long time ago. And she's been out. She was pre-selected very early, so she's been on campaign for 18 months. So and working it very hard, and she's a very nice mid-30s, mother of two, very bright, bubbly, intelligent sort of person. She's up against Rachel Sanderson, who's the Child Protection Minister, and has not been seen to do a great job in that role. So, but Sanderson has also been underestimated in previous years. She wasn't expected to win, the last couple of elections either, but she's managed to pull her out the bag. She knocked off Womack Smith in 2010 to everyone's surprise, and has hung on since then. So underestimating her would be folly, I'd imagine. But
Adelaide's the state seat of Adelaide.
Yes,
is a weird seat.
It is a weird seat. It takes in the Adelaide CBD, obviously, but also takes in some very, blue ribbon areas of Adelaide, North Adelaide, Walkerville, Gilberton, Medindie, which is home to, $5 million houses kind of thing. But I think Labour feels confident of areas. It also includes Prospect, which is, much more of it's in a city, but it's family friendly and this sort of stuff. And I think Lucy lives out in Prospect, and she's always out and about. And the Prospect's the biggest booth in that area as well. So she's a highly visible presence in that. And it takes in a bit of Nailsworth as well, which is quite similar in that sense as well. So you've got it's a very diverse seat. And I guess even in the CBD, you're going to have a lot of, new apartments have gone up and new people have come into the city. So you're going to have different people, younger people voting as well in that seat as well. So it could be, it's an interesting seat.
Certainly on my social media feed, I follow Lucy and have been since she first announced her candidacy. She's been out every weekend door knocking with teams of volunteers. Like, she's worked, as you said before, she's on the ground and she's working hard. Come election night, whether she wins or loses, she should be proud of the fact she's left nothing on the field because she's had a fair crack, which is great.
No, she's certainly given it everything. So it'll be fascinating to see. I mean, again, I guess, as I said, you wouldn't want to underestimate Sanderson, but I think most people think that Lucy will probably win the seat. And
Elder.
So Elder's in the inner south, held by the Libs, but I think that was the Patrick Conlon seat back in the day as well. So it's got a Labour kind of heritage as well to some extent, but it's kind of flicked around between both parties over the years. So this is kind of down in just the inner southern suburbs, places like Clarence Park, Clarence Gardens, which have become really interesting areas. Sort of again, young families and that sort of thing, but an area where real estate prices have gone through the roof in recent times, become very desirable sort of places to live. And it's held by the Libs at the moment by 2%. So again, it's in the mix there.
Carola Bibb is the
Carolyn Power now.
Oh, right. Sorry, I stand corrected. Obviously, a lot of controversy about the campaign and running a negative campaign against her a while ago. And
2014, she ran against Annabelle Digance, which is another story in itself with the Digances. But anyway. So she was Carolyn Habib back there before she got married, and I have to say the Labour ran a fairly disgraceful campaign there. They essentially ran these flyers saying, "Can you trust Habib?" with up against a kind of bullet-marked sort of brick wall, looking like she was just out of the Middle East and had violent tendencies, and it was, if not racist, very, very close to being racist. It was pretty disgraceful.
Wasn't our finest moment in campaigning.
No, it was pretty bad.
The last question I've got to ask you is, before we talk about other things.
Important things.
Indeed. The Prime Minister, if you're Scott Morrison, do you go visit South Australia? If you're Stephen Marshall, do you want Scott Morrison to come and visit you in South Australia during the campaign, or will he make himself scarce?
I think he'll come once, won't he, at least? I mean, I don't think in the current environment that the Premier would want the Prime Minister to be coming down. I don't think it's a positive for him. But Marshall is, he certainly attached himself pretty closely to Morrison over the whole COVID stuff. I think, what did Morrison refer to Marshall as a little quacker or something endearing or something at some point? So he certainly, I think Labour are trying to, push that line that, we're subservient to Canberra, that Marshall doesn't have the gumption to stand up to Canberra, stand up to Morrison for the good of the state. And, if you like Peter Malinauskas, he'll tell Canberra what's what, the formula that worked so well for Mike Rann and Jay Weather for many years. So, yeah, I can't, if he doesn't come, if Morrison didn't come, I think that would be a bigger story. If he, he too scared or he was, snubbing us or whatever. It'd be a bigger story if he doesn't come. So I'm sure he'll come at some point, probably with a big checkbook.
You'd think that if you're not that keen on it, you'd get it out of the way early so that it doesn't become a story. Do it soon in the campaign. And the campaign kind of officially kicked off on the weekend. I know Mally did the campaign launch. Looked fantastic. Great speech on Sunday, I think it was. Yeah. So the campaign proper has kicked off, right?
Yeah, it has. Yeah. No, it was interesting as well. They took two different approaches. Malinauskas did the traditional sort of, big bang approach to starting a campaign, whereas Marshall didn't do that. He spent Sunday going around 5 electorates and live streaming, meetings with candidates and people on a much lower key, lower, visibility sort of campaign, and was trying to, I think, link it to COVID and, mass gatherings weren't that sensible or something. But yeah. It was certainly a big contrast in approach. And I think Labour have been a bit more vibrant this week than the Libs. The Libs have been pretty low key about the whole thing so far, and Labour's been out there banging the traditional drums, and Liberals are looking a little bit like they're trying to catch up a bit.
So week one, you'd give the points to the Labor Party.
I would, yeah, definitely. I think they're setting the agenda, especially when it comes to health.
And predictions, if you want to make any.
That's early, isn't it? I know I'll look like a complete idiot in about 3 weeks' time, but I still think the Libs will hang on. I still think there's probably an element that after 16 years of Labour, 4 years as Libs, well, we've done okay. I think, why don't a bit of, we'll give this bloke one more go, see how it goes kind of thing, I don't know if enough people were willing to quite, make the big move to kick him out just yet. I think it'll be close. I think it'll be a minority government for the Libs. I could see them winning, 22, 23, then, relying on one of those independents, one of those Fraser Ellises or Troy Bells or someone just to get to 24. But that could change. I mean,
Don't never fear about making an idiot yourself, making a prediction, because I did an interview on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York at the 2016 presidential elections with the ABC Washington correspondent and said, Hillary's going to absolutely crush it.
Yeah, well, okay.
So, just get out there and tell us what you think. That's all that matters. I think
we'll move on, forget.
Indeed. I think Labor's going to win. I think they're going to win by 2 seats. Yep.
You're biased, though.
I am.
I'm a very unbiased, Murdoch journalist.
This is just a very biased little unknown podcast, Michael.
No, let's put me on the front page at the Age of the Australian.
Yeah, probably. Probably. Or someone will just grab this as their scoop. That's probably what tends to happen. In fact, you should just do it. You've got first dibs on it since you actually are on the podcast.
I think I should out myself somehow.
Yeah.
Outrageous, outrageous comments by journalists.
Indeed. All right. Now, this is the bit of when you're watching the cricket and Richie Benno says to our Sydney viewers, we're going to leave you, so you're going to watch the National Night News. To all of our viewers that don't care about football, in particular the Celtic Football Club, thank you for listening to today's episode. And I'll see you next week. But for those who want to stick around, let's talk about Celtic. I don't know which order to do this, because obviously we played this morning in the second leg of that, I don't know what they call this tournament, the champion.
Conference League.
Thank you, the Europa Conference League, second leg against Bodo Glimt. And we lost 2-0, 5-1 on aggregate over the course of the 2 games. Pretty shit performance, I thought, by Celtic. Since you didn't watch it, I don't think we need to talk too much about it. But so let's talk. Unless you've got any thoughts on it, let's talk more broadly.
Yeah.
How did you feel about the signing of Ange Postecoglou as the manager before he began? What were your expectations for this season?
Well, I put me in the camp of at the time of dubious. Obviously, we've seen a bit of Ange, and I must say, I thought he's mainly because of the way his career as Australian coach ended, and he kind of left the team before the World Cup, and he seemed to be very unhappy, very grumpy, seemed to be unable to take criticism. His team was playing terrible football and would tell you it was, playing wonderfully. And so so I was kind of uninspired at the time. But then I thought it'd be interesting. I thought the other part of me, the optimist part of me thought, well, you kind of know the way he tries to play football. If he goes to Celtic, he's going to have much better players to play with than he had to play with the Australian national team. So maybe you'll be able to, inspire something there, or you'll be able to implement his philosophies in a better way with players he's going to train every day and who are probably a higher skill level to be able to carry out his philosophy. Because I think one of my frustrations with him as Australian coach was he kept trying to play that philosophy with players who were clearly not up to the job. And he didn't want to be up to the job. I don't know.
Well, and that's the thing about international football. You can't go out and sign a better striker. You've got to, work with the cattle that comes from your country. That's sort of that's it, right? Whereas when you play when you're managing a club, obviously there's other restraints like budgets and whatnot. But if you've got the money, you can go and get the players you want to play the style you want to play.
Yeah. And I knew he'd done well in Japan, and again, the story was that he was playing fast, flowing, attacking football, and the Celtic fans, but that's the kind of football we like to see. So I wasn't, in despair when he was approached, but when he was appointed. But it was after that whole Eddie Howe debacle as well. So we were all feeling a bit down. So I was trying to find some optimism there somewhere, and you would think, well, all right, well, let's see how this goes. I didn't think it'd be dull. I thought it'd either be a complete, disaster or something of a triumph. But he's won me around.
It certainly had a kind of, is this another Tony Mowbray kind of moment for us, I thought. The other thing I was worried about actually was, after a while, I was talking to my brother about it, and he said, I'm more worried about because normally, Celtic supporters, we think everyone does it with their own club. They all think you're amazing. No one's bigger than us. But my brother sort of posed the question, will Ange actually get the kind of support that he probably expects? Because what I'd heard was the back room of the club had been gutted when Brendan Rodgers left. So sports analytics, nutritionists, physicians, physios, the whole, all the support staff all went. And when Lennon came in, he didn't give a shit about half that stuff anyway.
Yeah.
And so I was worried that Ange is going to rock up and go, what is this, 1986? What kind of elite football organisation is this,
Yeah.
And that he would be struggling from day one. And just reading into some of his comments that he said certainly at the start, remember the discussion about whether the Celtic was going to get a director of football and a whole bunch of other positions that he wanted to fill. Would he keep John Kennedy and Strachan's kid, whatever his first name is? Gavin, and his iPad. What would he do with his backroom staff? So I was worried about that. I was worried that Ange was actually going to go in there and actually just go, this is shit. I've got nothing to work with here.
Yeah. I can't win. Yeah, well, that's right. Because he turned up on his own, didn't he? We all kept waiting for him to bring across an assistant coach or two or build a team around him. But he went in and had to work with the team we all thought were rubbish last year and tried to make the best of it and try and convince. I mean, it must be hard to go into that environment and convince a lot of blokes who would have their own philosophy of football about this is what we're doing, this is how we're playing, and this is what I want you to do, and for them to jump on board and say, okay, we're with you, let's do this, But he's clearly a very effective communicator because everyone seems to have jumped on board.
In particular, the fans as well. I mean, I don't know if you social media, my God, Twitter just absolutely love Ange at the moment. And things are going at the moment. I haven't actually been on Twitter this morning to see what everyone's thoughts were.
No, me neither. I thought I'll leave that alone for the day.
I don't, for my own mental sanity.
Yeah.
But so how we've got 10 league games to go. We're 3 points on top of our rivals, Rangers. How are you feeling about the season so far?
I'm delighted. I mean, some of the the football has been. I've watched them more this year than I have in years, to be honest. And because I didn't end up watching a lot of games last year because it was just horrible. It was horrible football, and you knew they were going to lose, and it was just it was a bad atmosphere.
Oh no! The no atmosphere was just miserable.
Yeah. So this year it's been fun, and the defense gives me the willies, but that's I'm 50 years old. I've seen that before. But it's fun to watch them play when they're on the top of the game. That first half against Rangers was just astonishing. I don't think I've seen them play that well for years. Just the way that the pace and the aggression and the taking the chances and just not being prepared to take a backward step at any point was just thrilling to watch. I just hope we haven't peaked too early because it's been hasn't been quite the same since. Apart from the Motherwell, was it the Hearts game? Motherwell game was not too bad for a while, but
Wraith, Aberdeen, D on the weekend.
We went through that phase of dominating teams and not actually putting them away or letting them back in. Letting Aberdeen back in from 2-0 down and being in complete control was annoying. So
the set shots or goals coming from set pieces is a bit of a worry. Like there was some stat during the week in that Boys Analytics Twitter page that was talking about more than 50% of our goals conceded this year, albeit not many goals though. The defence has done quite a good job. Have come from set pieces, corners or free kicks.
Yeah, and every time we give away a corner or a free kick, you're kind of fearing the worst. You don't feel like we're not going to clear it or there's going to be a chance or And I don't know what they do about that, but neither Vickers or Starfelt seem particularly dominant in the box and the air. Well, they're not too bad elsewhere, but Hart seems a bit rooted to his line at times as well, which is a bit annoying. And you wonder whether Julian's got a role to play in there somewhere, but he's barely played, so who knows what sort of shape he's in really. So. But a bloke who was 6'6" might be quite handy for us at this stage.
I mean, both Starfelt and CCV are reasonably tall players, and so is that kid Welsh as well. They don't look tall.
No, they don't look tall, do they?
But they're over 6 foot. They just can't seem to. The marking must be letting us down, or just concentration. Those key moments. That second Dundee goal on the weekend, I said straight away when they got that free kick, I went, they're going to score. They're going to score here. I just feel it, and they did.
Yeah, that was the first one was even worse though. Just letting a block half volley winning from 6 yards at the back post. That was disgraceful. And
it kind of looked like it was organised because their main big targets all ran to the front post, whereas those two guys hung at the back. And one of the Dundee players basically sort of set up like a screen in basketball to let the other guy get loose from O'Reilly trying to mark him and then just slot it into the back post.
Yeah.
Teams have obviously, I mean, particularly from last year, I think they got a lot of confidence about, okay, this is how we beat Celtic. We need set pieces. Because they dive and look for free kicks. Or basically, once you get over halfway, that's it. They're just hitting the ground.
That's the whole game plan right there.
Yeah.
Because they very rarely cut us up in that sense. But it's the free kicks and we don't seem to organise it very well. I mean, that was a second goal that Aberdeen scored with Lewis Ferguson, who's good in the air, was being marked by Greg Taylor, who's 3'2". It's just ridiculous. Organisation.
What's with that? What have you made of the signings that Ange has brought in? One of the remarkable things about that result against the Huns was, I think 9 of the starting 11 were new signings from Postecoglou, which was remarkable given that he's only been there for 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, it's been great. I mean, they've been there's none of them you would say so far has been a complete dud. Even Jack Kamakis, who I thought was looking a bit ordinary for a while, it seems to have come good and is being useful clearly. So that O'Reilly looks like he could be an absolute star once he really gets the hang of things. I think. Not convinced.
Didn't play.
I didn't see this morning, but
I think he in possession with the ball and linking up play in forward areas, I think he's fantastic, and great example of that was the game against Rangers. But defensively, tracking back, marking, physicality. One of the things I took away from the Bodo game was that our midfield got bossed, and it's just because Rogic isn't a great sort of defender when out of possession. He's pretty slow. So that means that Callum McGuire in that defensive position's got to do a lot more work, as well as then O'Reilly's got to step up. I think Tartate's actually probably a better option for what they call in that number 8 position to hassle and harry, because he seems to really sort of nip around and catch people's heels and stuff, Whereas O'Reilly just is. I think sometimes he's lost.
I think it would take a while to adjust to it. I mean, he's come from League One. He's got a lot of talent. I just don't think you can play at this stage anyway. You can't play Roderick and O'Reilly in the same team very often, really, because I think they're both a bit too languid for their own goods. But if you had one of them and another one coming off the bench, I think you do pretty well. But when's Kyogo back?
Oh no, it's funny because no one wants to ask that question anymore after Ange told that journalist to fuck off. Stop asking me questions about when Kyogo's coming back. No one
want to know.
I know, and I bet you all the journos, when they walk into the press room, are all whispering to each other at the start, going, "Who's going to ask the Kyogo question?" "I'm not doing it. You do it. You do. I'm not doing it."
He must come back at some point. I think he would make a big difference. I think, we've been a bit. The energy he provides would be fantastic. As good as we've been, it'd be nice to have him back, I think, for the run home.
And that type of play that Ange wants us to play, it requires a lot of movement off the ball from both the midfield, wide areas, and the guys up front. And Giakoumakis has done a great job as that point kind of target forward, physicality and stuff. But I just don't. Giakoumakis and Maeda, I just don't think that's worked.
Yeah, probably not yet. I think Maeda's still settling in as well. I think a lot of these people will be a lot better next year when they've had a whole year of, at least 6 months of training with Ange and playing with their teammates and all that sort of stuff. I mean, we had, Hatate and Maeda come in, since January and become important parts of the team. But, it must be hard to make that adjustment quickly. And
you're probably thinking half these guys are probably staying in hotels and stuff as well. I mean, have their lives actually settled in Glasgow? Have they managed to buy their mansion in, Milgai or Bears Den or whatever, right?
It would be a bit of a culture shock from Tokyo, certainly.
Absolutely, particularly because the natives don't speak English. Sorry.
It's bloody anti-Scots racism for you.
Oh, come on, man. One thing actually, not more broadly related to football in general, but starting to give me the shits, time wasting. Time wasting is giving me the shits. Can FIFA change the rules and move to a similar model of, like, say, in American football and basketball and hockey, and I think netball might have even done it. When the ball's not in play, stop the clock. Take the clock away from the referee, go upstairs and let them manage the time. When the ball's out, stop the clock. When the ball's back in play, start the clock. People don't time waste then because you can't waste time when the clock's not ticking.
You know how long games would be then? I think is the ball in play 60 minutes a game or something?
Yeah, something like that.
I read that somewhere.
I'm fine with that because then no one will be mucking around anymore because everyone's basically got each team will get 90 minutes to win the game.
No, that's frustrating. But gamesmanship's always been part of the deal, hasn't it?
Just
diving at the right time and just eating up the clock a little bit more, and it's part of the fun of the game, isn't it?
No, it's killing.
You're getting older and grumpier.
I am. I am. It's a pet peeve. That's one way we can fix it. They can't fix the diving and the rolling around for some. I don't know how we're ever going to fix that. That's just.
Yeah, that's a lot. That does annoy me. But maybe as an older player, I'm still playing. I'm quite happy with the time wasting, so I can get my breath back.
Yeah, I can imagine. Predictions for the season. How are we going to go in the league? Do you think?
We're going to win by 9 points.
Wow. Okay, you're far more optimistic about Celtic than you are about the Labor Party.
Well, I've invested in Celtic.
True. 2 crucial games against the Huns to still to play, one at home, one away. The other weird thing about it is this scenario that the SPL have got themselves in with fixturing. Have you been following that?
In terms of home and away games after the split?
Because technically...
we're supposed to have 5, aren't we, technically?
Yeah, and technically the Huns are supposed to have 5 away, but they're not going to do that because, they're all in the lodge.
Imagine. Jeez, how do they arrange after they get a refereeing decision going against them? They call us paranoid. They're unbelievable.
That is the word. It is unbelievable.
They're just... Every time they don't get exactly what they want, it's a conspiracy, and, they're all out to get us, and, no one likes us and we don't care except we do, and, it's just, it's pathetic. It's a different world.
It's remarkable to think that actually, we think about back to the start of the season, what our prospects were, that we're still on course for a treble.
Yes. If we could win the league, it would be an astonishing achievement, I think. I know we probably said a while back that, well, if we get close, that's good and that's something to build on. But if we threw it away now, I'd be devastated. It would just be, it'd be a very sweet one to win this one, given, the debacle that was last year. And I think a view that Rangers are going to dominate us for years and years to come, and it'd be a very sweet one to win this.
And I think it also just sets a tone, resets that tone, and makes that season last year as a blimp, like a sort of a...
Yeah, that's right. Let's not forget we've won 9 out of the last 10 leagues.
Yeah, and it's an outlier,
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to get ahead of us. I was about to say,
I know. I probably shouldn't say these things, but I don't know.
Anyway, well, Malcolm McGuire, it's been wonderful to talk to you both about politics and Celtic.
No, it's been nice to speak to you, Stephen, again. We don't speak often enough. It's fun.
Indeed. Good luck. Anything you want to plug? I know you've written a couple of books.
Yes, the last one out was a couple of years ago, but if people want to read Flight Risk, feel free. It's a good rollicking adventure. There's also Never a True Word, which may or may not be set in my time in politics, working in the South Australian state government, which is what would you call it? Political satire, political rumination. It's a novel though. It's not a memoir. It's a novel with some jokes.
Very good.
It's fun.
At all good bookstores. Wonderful to see you again, and I look forward to having a beer with you in Adelaide sometime soon.
That'd be lovely, Stephen. Thank you.
Hey there. Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And to get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday.